Darkness swallowed the Ukrainian skies, and with it, the fragile hope of peace. Overnight, the air raid sirens screamed across cities and villages from Kyiv to Odesa as a relentless storm of drones and missiles descended on a country already ravaged. It was one of the deadliest, most ambitious assaults since the war began. 653 strike drones and 51 missiles unleashed in a single, devastating wave. The barrage did not come in isolation. It tore across the fabric of daily life, ripping through power lines, eviscerating critical infrastructure, and painting towns with fire and fear. In at least 8 Ukrainian regions, energy and heat supplies collapsed. Entire neighborhoods were plunged into darkness just as winter's cold gripped the land. The night began with a detection. Ukrainian radar units tracked 704 aerial threats. The 653 drones joined by a mix of cruise missiles, ballistic rockets, and loitering munitions of various types. Among the missiles were reports of advanced ballistic weapons. Despite the ferocity of the assault, Ukraine's defenses held, at least to a degree. Intercepting strikes from the Air Force, surface-to-air missile units, electronic warfare detachments, and mobile fire groups, defensive systems brought down 585 drones and 30 missiles. Still, the scale of destruction was undeniable. Around 29 locations, energy substations, rail hubs, residential zones were struck. In the Kyiv region, one of the hardest-hit areas, devastation unfolded in real time. The town of Fastiv, home to a critical railway hub, was hit. Its station building and several locomotives destroyed, derailing both transport and people's lives in the cold night. The assault spread far beyond, reaching into western and northern reaches of Ukraine, as reports of downed drones and missile debris came from as far as Lviv and Chernihiv. At least 8 civilians were wounded, including 3 in Kyiv region shelling. Stark reminders that this was not mere strategic posturing, but a violent shock inflicted on ordinary life. The assault struck at a critical moment, while diplomats and negotiators from Kyiv met with U.S. officials in Miami, exploring a potential pathway to peace. In that negotiating room, hopes were cautiously being nurtured for an end to the conflict. Outside, Russia tore those hopes apart in fire and fury. The symmetry of that moment, talks of peace inside conference rooms, but drones raining destruction outside, speaks volumes about the message Moscow intended. It wasn't a mere display of force, but a blunt instrument aimed at reminding Ukraine and the world that on this front, mercy is not in Russia's arsenal. As power grids collapsed and people scrambled for warmth, the deeper truth became stark. This war is no longer just fought on front lines. It has become a war on civilians, on winter, on the fragile promises of normal life. The consequences will echo for days, in darkened homes, halted trains, disrupted heat for families, and in the psyche of a nation already exhausted by years of conflict. And tonight, under a sky once again void of light, Ukraine stands battered but defiant. The morning after the strike, as the first pale winter light touched bomb-scarred rooftops, the full scope of the destruction began to emerge. In dozens of Ukrainian towns, once stable lives lay in fragments. Energy substations smoldered or lay dark. Rail lines lay twisted or severed. Commuter trains stood idle, and families huddled in the chill of a deepening winter, uncertain whether heat or water would return. The silence that greeted the dawn was not peace, but the echo of war's cruelty, a shifting lull before the next storm. Across multiple regions, from the industrial east to the far-reaching west and south, the damage was neither random nor symbolic. The airstrike deliberately targeted power generation, transmission, and distribution networks, hit railway hubs that connect cities, struck systems that sustain life through heat and light. The fallout: tens of thousands of households without electricity, thousands without heat or running water, rail travel suspended, supply chains disrupted. One of the most chilling, consequential hits came at the country's largest nuclear power facility, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, A site already steeped in danger and global attention, the assault forced the plant to momentarily lose its off-site power supply, plunging the reactor's cooling systems into emergency protocol. Though power was restored within minutes, and radiation levels remained nominal, the incident underscored how close Europe edged to a nightmare scenario. As officials scrambled repair teams, emergency crews braved unstable power grids, damaged infrastructure, and the constant risk of further strikes. Rolling blackouts were declared as the only measure to prevent grid collapse, while crews worked to restore critical systems. In the port city of Odesa, nearly 10,000 households lost heating, and tens of thousands were left without water, ordinary people suddenly stripped of vital utilities. The assault also laid bare the vulnerability of Ukraine's transport arteries. At the rail junction in Fastiv, just outside Kyiv, a main station depot and rolling stock were destroyed. Suburban trains were cancelled, regional rail traffic frozen, commuters stranded. For many, what had been a routine morning commute turned into a stark confrontation with war's reach. Amid the wreckage, Ukrainian authorities and citizens expressed outrage, not just at the destruction, but at the timing. The assault came while diplomats from Kyiv and Washington were meeting to advance peace negotiations, a clear signal that military aggression was being used as leverage. For many inside Ukraine, the strike stripped away any illusions. This war is not solely about territory, but about eroding the will and stability of a nation. Yet in the face of such calculated devastation, a grim resolve took hold. Local rescue and energy restoration teams worked through hazardous conditions, repairing downed power lines and restoring partial electricity where possible. Railway operators tried rerouting trains or mobilizing alternate transport. Communities knit together, supporting the wounded, sharing scarce warmth and resources. But the psychological toll weighed heavy. Homes once full of winter's promise, warmth, cooking, family, became cold shells. Darkness lingered longer than usual. Children shivered, elders worried. The infrastructure of everyday life was broken, and for a country still under full-scale invasion, that break runs deeper than cables or rails. It reaches the heart of what normal life means. As Ukraine stares down the bitter weeks ahead, the attack has made one fact brutally clear. This is a war not only against armies, but against the very backbone of civilian life. The battle lines are no longer only in the trenches. They now run through power plants, rail hubs, apartment blocks, across winter streets where ordinary people scramble to stay warm. Through the smoke and rubble, Ukraine's defense forces, crew workers, and ordinary civilians alike stand in darkened towns, facing not just missiles or drones, but the harsh winter's cold, and the fear that the next strike may come before repair crews finish. The country braces itself because the war has entered a new phase, systemic destruction, aimed not only at territory, but at the survival of everyday life. The storms of steel and fire that tore through Ukraine's skies left a deeper scar than the blackened railway yards or shattered transformers. In the aftermath of the most intense drone and missile barrage in years, a crumbling core of normalcy lies exposed, and with it, the fragile pulse of a country at war. Even with many intercepts, the remnants of Russia's strike reached deep into Ukraine's lifelines. In the southern port city of Odesa, tens of thousands of residents woke to empty radiators and cold water taps. Heat and water supplies severed just as winter tightens its grip. The national energy operator confirmed that across several regions, between 9,500 and 34,000 households remained without heating or water following the strike. Authorities activated rolling blackouts as a necessary but painful measure to prevent further collapse of the grid, while repair crews scrambled to restore critical lines. In towns and villages, the cold was not just a weather hardship. It had become a weapon of war, a reminder that the
conflict was no longer confined to bombs and bullets, but had seeped into the everyday needs of civilians. One of the most alarming consequences came from a facility that should never have been on any front line: the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The plant, Europe's largest and already under Russian control, briefly lost its off-site power supply as the assault disrupted the national grid. Cooling systems kicked into emergency mode, prompting global concern over what a longer blackout could have triggered. Radiation levels remained stable after quick restoration of power via a 330 kilovolt line, but the incident underscored the razor-thin margin separating a blackout from a nuclear catastrophe.
The railway networks, arteries of civilian life, bore bitter evidence of the strike's reach. In the town of Fastiv, just outside the capital, a key train depot was obliterated, tracks twisted, locomotives charred, regional and commuter rail lines halted indefinitely, daily routines shattered, people bound for work or family, students heading to school, shipments of food and essentials, all frozen in time. On the political front, the timing of the assault spoke loudly. The attack coincided with talks between Ukrainian and American delegations aimed at forging a peace framework, a symbolic juxtaposition of diplomacy and destruction. For many observers, the message from Moscow could not have been clearer. Negotiations may be underway, but on the ground, the war continues, with civilians and infrastructure bearing the brunt. In the halls of Kyiv's government and among local officials, anger and grief rose alongside the practical scramble for restoration. The strike was denounced not merely as a military operation, but as a deliberate campaign targeting civilian life, energy, homes, transport, winter safety. Yet amid the ruins and the cold, persistence flickers. Rescue crews, energy workers, railway teams, many risking further strike, moved to restore what they could. In regions cut off from heat and water, neighbors shared what remained: warm clothes, blankets, generators. In towns like Fastiv and Odesa, volunteer efforts helped transport the most vulnerable to safe shelters. The war has shifted again. Physical front lines are still important, but increasingly they are drawn around power substations, cooling towers, railway hubs, heating networks, around the fragile infrastructure that sustains human life. Every broken transformer, every canceled train, every blackout in the dead of winter is not collateral damage. It is strategy. For Ukraine, the challenge is no longer only to defend territory. It is to defend the right to sleep warm, to drink water, to move, to live without fear that death might come not from shellfire, but from the silence of a city without power. In the cold uncertainty of the coming days, the question is not whether the hammer will strike again, but whether the country can survive the darkness, the cold, and the pressure bearing down on it all at once. If you want more clear, fact-based reporting on events shaping the world, consider subscribing to the channel.